Alright everyone, so we just had a great chapter to wrap up Brook's backstory. I actually thought that this was going to run longer because we would get to see what happened with Princess Shuri, but it seems that it's likely that we're going to have a second piece of this flashback, this time likely from her perspective, showcasing what she went through in these many decades of servitude to Imu. And of course we have the big return of Luffy at the end of the chapter, so let's just take things from the top. So to begin with, it's established that Imu possessed Mars, which makes a lot of sense for how Dami Reversi took place, because that was a question mark for me. So this is really interesting because it just highlights how special Shuri aka Gunko is today to Imu. Because so far it seems that for Imu to possess someone as an avatar, they need to be a Gorosei, not a God's Knight. But Gunko aka Shuri is the one exception. We see at God Valley, Imu possessed Saturn, not any of the God's Knights there. We see here at Esperia that Imu possessed Mars, not God's Knight Gro, which suggests to me that Mars was sent all the way to Esperia just so that Imu had someone to possess, which is really funny to me. And then finally in Elbaf, we see that Imu doesn't possess any of the other God's Knights, Somers or Killingham, he only possesses Gunko. And of course, Gunko is unable to age unlike the rest of the God's Knights, so she's clearly been given special capabilities by Imu that the rest of the God's Knights don't get. And it now seems likely that this may have something to do with her special eyes. I'm really curious where Oda is going with this whole eye thing. We already had something along these lines with Pudding, who has a third eye, which is also very rare in One Piece. And similar to these bipolar eyes, the third eye is something that needs to be awakened, and Pudding also is not yet awakened that. So I don't know where Oda is going with all this, but we're getting into kind of Naruto territory here with the Sharingan and the Rinnegan and things like that. We know that Pudding's third eye would allow her to read the poneglyphs, I assume, among other things, so I'm just really curious what this Manmare ability would allow one to do. Now, what I really appreciated about this chapter is that we got some explanation as to why Brook just believed that Shuri had turned evil, because it really is a very convincing performance by Shuri here. It's not like Brook just came in, saw what the scene was, and was like, oh my god, Shuri's evil. He felt that there must be something wrong, and I like that because there is a lifetime of trust that's built into their relationship. Have you ever wanted a deck of One Piece playing cards? That's right, you can get an entire 52 card deck with all of One Piece's most iconic characters represented by different cards, from the King of Spades all the way to the Two of Diamonds. We've even got the Jokers. Find out which card your favorite character is, and the best part is, if you buy 2 character posters from our Legends collection, you can get another 2 posters plus the deck of cards free. This deal goes away at the end of the month, so make sure you get your deal on playing cards by hitting the link in the description below. So Brook initially refuses to believe his eyes, demands an explanation, and is trying to find some other way for all of this to make sense. But Shuri very brutally shuts that all down beat by beat, explaining that no, this is the way things are. I am a Celestial Dragon, I want to be a Celestial Dragon, I don't care about the king, yada yada, and then she stabs Brook. So at the end of the day, she pretty much does everything possible to make Brook unable to accept anything other than what seems to be the truth, which is that Shuri is just an evil Celestial Dragon who hates him and her father. Now I do want to talk about the God's Knight Gro here, because there is a possibility that he might be the man marked by flames. If he was not given agelessness like Gunko, then it's unlikely that this could be the case. But it should be noted that at God Valley, we were only shown 7 God's Knights when there should be 8, so I'm curious if he was still around at this point in time, just sent on some separate mission. He does seem to be a very imposing figure, so maybe stronger than God's Knights like Somers or Killingham. And he also doesn't really grovel around Imu like someone like Somers would. So I hope that this is a character that we're going to continue on to see in the modern day, because I'm very curious about him. Now, as for the conclusion of the flashback itself, again, I said last chapter in my review that I felt that this was a really well done flashback, with Oda using music in a very creative way that he hasn't done in the series before. And this chapter continued that trend with a great touch of having music lyrics start playing again when Shuri basically ends things with a Gavotte Bon Avant of all things. Just having the music kick in right then just makes the whole situation feel that much more twisted, dark, and tragic. And when Brook wakes up and remembers everything that happened, I feel like this has to be one of the most mind-breaking scenes in all of One Piece. Like, I don't think any single character in One Piece has in a single day experienced anything as extreme as Brook. You could definitely argue Robin with Ohara, but I think with Brook, the added touch of it being that not only did he lose essentially his father figure and benefactor and the kingdom that he really loved and cared for, but the big piece is that essentially someone who he considered his own daughter figure to some degree is the one who was responsible for it all and revealed that she hated him and tried to kill him. I think that's just a very unique concoction of emotional damage that we've never really seen before in this series. And it's so bad that it seems that Brook has essentially repressed that memory. Like, as bad as Brook's previous flashback was with the Rumbar Pirates, that's still something that he revisits and is willing to, play music and think back to, as we saw in Thriller Bark, because it was very tragic but bittersweet and a fond memory for him almost in a certain way. The situation that we had in Hesperia, though, just seems to have been so messed up that he had to basically bury it and never think about it. And if we think about the recurring pattern over the course of Brook's tragedies, because he has experienced 3 over the course of his lifetime, first losing his biological family, then losing his makeshift family in Hesperia, and finally losing his crew, the Rumbar Pirates, across all 3 of those tragedies, the recurring pattern is that Brook is left all alone at the end. But the difference with this Hesperia tragedy is that not only is he left all alone in the end, but the bonds and relationships that he's lost in this process also have become tainted and sullied. Like, he probably cannot think back to King Leuven without thinking about Shuri murdering her own father. He probably can't think back to Candle without thinking about what that celestial dragon did to her. And of course, he can't think back to his daughter figure Shuri without remembering the most painful betrayal of his life. And a really important component for all this is that Brook is a Straw Hat for whom loyalty matters a lot. It may be his most important value. He is still fighting to return back to his friend, a whale from 50 years ago, because he made a promise in his past life. That is how highly he treasures his bonds. And so for this to happen with Shuri, and for this to be his memory of how things played out, is just so heartbreaking for this character. Overall, I would say that this is a very strong flashback. I actually put it above Brook's previous flashback. I don't think it's going to go into my very top tier of favorite One Piece flashbacks, simply because it did go by a little bit quickly. I will say that the cut that we get in this chapter from Brook in the past at the end of the flashback as a human having a mental breakdown as he processes the tragedy, back to modern day Brook the skeleton, is a little jarring, because the Brook from the past feels like a very real and multi-dimensional person, and what we got out of him, especially the last couple chapters, just feels like a very raw and human experience. And the Brook in the modern day has generally been written as a crazy, goofy, zany skeleton. But it is just a little weird to take that image of who he once was and then transpose it into this kind of caricature character that we have today. Even just Brook running off in this chapter to go see Shuri, even though I know it's supposed to feel really tragic, and I do feel that to some degree, it also just feels a little silly because of just the way that he's drawn and the way his expressions and mannerisms are nowadays. I do feel like I have much greater appreciation for Brook, and I feel like he has so much more depth as a character now that I feel was missing before for him. But I also think it would be nice if we kind of saw shades of the old Brook a bit more frequently in the man that he is today, instead of just 90% of his dialogue being kooky skull jokes or panty jokes. That said, I'm very much looking forward to the Brook and Shuri reunion. The question, of course, now is how are they going to break the ice? I like that it seems that this gives some of the Straw Hats something to do, and it's not just something trivial, it feels like it's something really important to the story. Now, whether they can be effective in breaking this ice, I don't know, but I like that it sort of rallied the Straw Hats together at the very least. Now, finally, we cut back to Imu and Loki. That battle's still going, and Imu gives us some more lore information, and he explains that 800 years ago the Giants were defeated by using their love for their children against them. Now, this fits into how I believe the Void Century War played out, because I've already explained in multiple videos in the past that most signs point to Imu not having defeated Joy Boy in straight-up combat, but rather having used trickery or cunning to defeat Joy Boy. And therefore, Imu had to use trickery to defeat the Giants in the past, because the strongest giant was equal to the previous Nika user. But Imu's explanation is, of course, interrupted by Luffy coming in swinging. Now, Luffy comes in at absolute 100% full power here. No excuses or anything like that. This is the best version of Luffy that we can possibly get, and he hits Imu with a good attack right off the bat. I honestly wish we got to see a little bit more of what just base normal Luffy can do, because he really doesn't need to go gear 5th as frequently as he does. Like, he didn't need to do it against Rob Lucci, he didn't need to do it against Roto's random pets in the Legoland arc. I know that Luffy just generally likes to use gear 5th, but look, it's cool to get a reminder that base Luffy is also a Yonko level character. He split the sky with Kaido after all, and was going toe-to-toe with Kaido for a long time without having to use gear 4th or gear 5th. Really good early shot in at the end of this chapter. I'm very curious to see how the rest of this plays out. I'm excited for the Luffy-Loki duo versus Imu. The only thing that I ask for is that it makes sense. This is not something to dismiss as a power scaling issue. This is about just general story logic and stakes and progression. The same way that the story would lose any sort of sense of stakes, build-up, and narrative progression, if Luffy went directly from struggling with Katakuri in Whole Cake Island to immediately being able to hold his own with Kaido in Wano? So too would that be the case if Luffy went from struggling with a Gorosei like Warkiri to holding his own against Imu of all people the very next arc, with zero explanation. Much of the New World's sense of progression and the weight of Luffy's climb to the top has come from Oda actually being very consistent with writing Luffy's progression of struggle. Gear 4 Luffy did well against Doflamingo, but then began to struggle against Cracker, and therefore logically, by the time Luffy was up against Katakuri, Luffy was now out of his league, and we had to watch him get stronger to keep up. And then going from a first mate like Katakuri to a Yonko like Kaido meant that an even bigger gap had to now be bridged. And we watched Luffy bridge that gap over the course of many attempts and a lot of training throughout Wano. Now since Wano, we've been shown that Luffy can now basically go toe-to-toe with an admiral, and still has issues with a strong Gorosei like Warkiri. If that's where Oda has established Luffy is in his journey, then having him just jump to beating up God basically throws away so much of what's made Luffy's journey meaningful for the last several hundred chapters. So I'm all good with whatever outcome Oda writes for the fight, as long as it feels like Luffy's growth still has meaning. So with that, I am very much looking forward to next week where the battle with Imu resumes, and this time it seems like it's going to be a tag team with Luffy and Loki going at it against God himself. I'm going to give this chapter a 9 out of 10, and with that, I will talk to you all later.